Hi everyone, it's Brenda Tufte. Welcome to the book study course. I have been a educator in K-12 for over 20 years, 15 of those in the state of North Dakota. And I currently teach at the University of Mary in Bismarck in the education department. I teach primarily in the doctorate program for educational leadership. And when I was asked to share a short video with you as a co-author of the book that was selected, I was absolutely honored to do so. And so for Module 1, it focuses primarily on the introduction. And so I'll be just sharing a few experiences and insights from that come from the introduction and the data that was gathered in a 2-year study that was the foundation of the book that we published through Rowman and Littlefield. My co-author John Tufte and husband as well will be presenting and guiding you through Module 2 of the course. And we have our contact information here. If ever you're reading anything and you have questions or just want to discuss something that you're curious about, we would absolutely love to visit with you. So those emails are also in the module. I mentioned that the study that we did was a 2-year study, and I wanted to share the methodology that we used to discover what is it that educators are doing in schools that helps prepare or helps maybe not prepare students for college. And we focused on qualitative interviews, and we really visited with students about how prepared they felt for college when we interviewed freshmen in college and they had, been there for either a semester or a year. We wanted to know in what areas they were well prepared and some of the things that they experienced and things that their teachers helped them with that helped them to be prepared in those areas. And then we were also interested in areas where they weren't prepared, and really trying to kind of identify those gaps and think about how we could try to close some of those gaps, knowing that there's only about half of the students that start college that actually finish. The qualitative study really was rooted in grounded theory model. And just to give a brief explanation of grounded theory, it's not where researchers go in to try to prove something, right or wrong. It's really to understand the lived experiences of participants and to report that data. And so, of course, there's a lot that's written in the literature about what's working in schools and what schools should be doing and what schools shouldn't be doing. And here's the brand new model, or this is the brand new technology. And we weren't trying to prove or disprove those things. We really wanted to know what worked for the graduates that we interviewed. And we chose qualitative interviews and grounded theory because that allowed us to get to not just what worked and who are those high impact educators that helped them to be successful, but how did they do it? We wanted to be able to learn from that. So although the study took about 2 years, the data gathering window was just over a year. And in that time, we did interviews across 11 states in the nation. And so as we got our Institutional Review Board permission to go into universities and do that research, and some of the research was done in the state of North Dakota as well, we did agree to not interview any of our current students or past students. All in all, we interviewed 158 graduates, and each interview was 45 to 60 minutes long. We were always really mindful of stopping at 60 minutes, even though there were students who still sometimes had more to say. And we were absolutely engrossed in those interviews. And I really thought going in, traveling and going in and talking to students for that period of time would be sort of grueling. And while it was hard work, I can honestly say it was absolutely intriguing. There wasn't a single interview where I didn't get this sort of nugget of truth that really provoked my thinking, inspired me as an educator. It got me thinking and maybe even rethinking some things. And so the time went by fast. And I think probably the real grueling part was the analysis of the data. So 158 students from 11 states, and we use non-probability purposive sampling, which means that we went into the settings that agree to allow us to come to the universities and to interview their freshmen and their seniors. And we used a $10 recruitment incentive. And so just to kind of try to get as many participants as we could, and we just randomly selected them as they came. We found that there were many more freshmen on campus that were willing to be interviewed than there were seniors. And so we sometimes had to tell the freshmen, okay, we don't have any more spots available for freshmen, and we're really having to go look for seniors. And we sometimes had to go into certain buildings to find those seniors because they were less likely to be hanging out in the cafeteria like freshmen were. 61 freshmen overall and 43 seniors were interviewed. And as we interviewed the freshmen, our goal was really to inform K-12 teaching and to hear from them, what was it that your teachers in K-12 were doing that helped you to get to this point? You're either in your first or second semester of college, you made it here. How prepared were you? Where were you not prepared? And what helped you or impeded that preparation or lack thereof. That was the focus for the freshmen. For the seniors, we really wanted to shift to what post-secondary education teachers were doing to help students to get from their freshman year to their senior year. And most of our interviews with seniors were done either late fall or in the spring. And so they were so close to graduation, and we really wanted to hear what their experience was in college, what their classroom experience was like, that learning experience. We wanted to hear about internships. We wanted to hear about how they developed the skills and knowledge to graduate and be ready to go on to their selected careers. And we had all kinds of careers. We purposely didn't go to certain buildings that housed just one major because we wanted to have a variety of majors, which I think was really successful. In phase 2 of the study, we interviewed newly hired grads, so graduates of college who were within their first 3 years of their selected career. And so they're working. And of course, the question there was, how well prepared were you for your job, for your career? Where were you and weren't you prepared? And what surprised you about what was needed in that preparation? What kinds of skills and knowledge you might need in your job that either you did or didn't get? And again, with interviews, we were looking at the how. What was it that was helpful? And how did educators do that for you and help you to get there? Those are the participants. Those are our 158 participants. And the states that were represented, these are the 11 states. And some of the states we selected simply for proximity. We could get to them a little faster, or we had connections at a university in that state, and they were much more likely to give us permission to go in. And we are extremely grateful to the universities that allowed us to come in and talk to their students and trusted us to do that. And we found them to be extremely hospitable. They'd set up offices for us. They'd allowed us to put up flyers and to hand out recruitment posters as we were on campus, and even asked professors to announce that we would be in a certain location at the university if students were interested in being interviewed. Here's what we wanted to know. Our first research question, and this was primarily for the freshmen in college: what factors do graduates perceive contributed to their preparation for college? We were, of course, especially interested in things that educators were doing that were helpful. We were also interested in curriculum. We were interested in in the mindsets that helped them to be successful. And we learned a lot about mindsets when we asked them about what obstacles they encountered, because no one gets through without challenges. And it was interesting to hear how they overcame challenges and how educators helped them to overcome challenges that could have impeded their ability to go on to college if that was their goal. As educators and as parents, we know that college isn't necessarily the goal for everyone, but that was the focus of this study. When you develop research questions and develop a study, you really have to narrow it. And so we decided to focus on college readiness and what helps students to get there. The second question was, what factors did graduates perceive contributed to their completion of college? So this was the focus on the seniors in college, and particularly within their majors, and what expectations of the particular major that they chose were important for them, and how they were able to develop the knowledge and skills to be able to be successful there. And then finally, this is our newly hired grads. What did they perceive contributed to their preparation for their post-college careers? And there were some surprises in every stage of these. I will tell you that when we got to the last stage of interviewing the newly hired grads, we had just reams and reams of data, the transcripts that we were analyzing. And every time we'd leave a site, we'd set aside a chunk of time to go through the transcripts and begin to analyze them and look for those open codes and eventually those axial codes. And we had so many codes that became themes because they were repeated, and we'd hear it again and again, and we had that saturation in the data, which is exactly what you're looking for in qualitative research, where we've heard it over and over, and it becomes this truth and this data that is saturated. In other words, we had enough evidence to be able to share that claim or that conclusion that came from the data and from the participants. And John said to me, I don't even know why we're doing the third phase of the study, or the second phase of the study, that third group, because we have so much data and so much saturation. I think we should just start reporting and start writing. And I completely agreed with him, but we had already set up all of the interviews for the newly hired grads. And we had, in our IRB, structured the study like that. So we decided to keep the integrity of the methodology. We would go through with that third stage of the study. And I will tell you that it was in that stage that one of the major themes of the book really emerged strongly with those newly hired grads, and that was the area of collaboration. And I will tell you, I was interested, as an educator, and if you look at the literature, particularly literature in business, companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, they all talk about how important collaboration is to learning and to being able to be successful. And so, as an educator, it's messy, but I also, as a learner and as a teacher, I use a lot of collaboration, and I like to collaborate. It does help me to learn. I'm always benefiting from others. And so when we asked our freshmen in college about what their K-12 teachers were doing with collaboration, and how did collaboration help facilitate their learning and help them to be successful in college, and even what were college professors doing with collaboration, and how did that help them to be successful in their college career, and it was absolutely lukewarm. I said to John, there's no way collaboration is going to make it as a theme, as one of those highly impactful teaching strategies and learning experiences, because in fact they were kind of sour on it. As we'd ask them about their experiences with collaboration and their learning, they would talk about all of the problems with it. And, it's messy. We know that. And so perhaps it doesn't surprise us. There were very few who even said anything positive about collaboration. The high school, the seniors in college said, like, yeah, we get why you have to do it, and we get the importance of collaboration. but they'd say we can't really say it helped us with our learning. They talk about the bulldozers, they talk about the hitchhikers who didn't do the work. And it was when we talked to the newly hired grads that they said collaboration was like being able to collaborate and learning how to collaborate was absolutely vital to our success in our jobs. Engineers talking about how we work in teams and in our engineering firm, and then our teams work with other teams from other engineering firms when we're on a really complex job. And there's all of these different areas of expertise. We talked to a tax accountant who helps people save money on their taxes. And he said, I could not do my job if I couldn't collaborate. And he said, I'm kind of a shy guy, so being able to collaborate or having to collaborate is difficult for me. But tax law, he said, is so complex and it's always changing. And if I didn't collaborate, there's no way that I could help my clients. And so just over and over and over, they talked about that. When you get to the chapter, you'll be interested about when we asked them the question, when you're working with professionals, do you ever experience, we told them about what students had said to us about, the hitchhikers, the bulldozers, people not coming with their action steps done. And we asked them about that. And so I'm going to challenge you to really pay attention to what they said and how and why things are different. It'll make you think a little bit differently, I think, about collaboration. It certainly did for me. And I think it helped me value it more, but it also helped me to really think about how I need to structure collaboration in order for it to be helpful for students. Here are the areas that we were again looking at. K-12 teachers, what were they doing to help students to be successful in starting college and getting there? What were the college professors doing to help students to get to graduation? And then when we talk about K-12 teachers, college professors, we also know that anyone in an educational facility is a mentor. Coaches, librarians, counselors, advisors. There are so many adults in buildings that are influential on students. And one thing I will add is, although we recognized that students would talk about a lot of different kinds of mentors, it helped me to realize when I heard how much they talked about different people in the school that really influenced them, nobody outdid teachers. I mean, teachers are the most influential, hands down. Administrators sometimes have an impact as well, which was interesting. So for me in the area of ed leadership, I think that, and I've read research that administrators can be very influential, especially on culture and climate and how that impacts learning. But with the exception of teachers, teachers are always the most impactful. But it really helped me to think about how important it is that the people who are working in our school systems, in our universities, how important it is that they know the impact that they have. It's important that we all know our impact, but it is, I think, particularly essential that people who might not think of their role in an educational facility as being impactful on a student's success and ability to carry out their goals, I think it's vital that we communicate that and that we provide professional development and communicate well with all of them. In addition to the people in the building, we were interested in teaching methodology. Like, what was it that teachers were doing? How were they doing it that was particularly successful or not as successful for students? And then, of course, the curriculum. We asked about technology. You'll be surprised at what you found out about the role that technology played in impacting their education. And not to say that it's not important, it just wasn't a critical. And then, of course, student skills and dispositions, not only what skills and dispositions were necessary, the great thing about doing the interviews was we could ask them, how did you develop those? Where did that come from? And some really good discussions came around the question, where were you challenged? What obstacles did you encounter when you were in K-12 or in your freshman year in college, your senior year in college, when you first started your job? What challenges did you have? Where were you not prepared? And that was when they would talk about dispositions, and they would talk about roles that educators play too in helping them to get through those. And so we were really able to drill down into the how. Tell us how that developed, and how did you learn that? And then finally, what we wanted to know was anything else that would emerge. That's the great thing about grounded theory. Sometimes things emerge over and over and over, where it's a saturated data piece, and it would actually be unethical to ignore it because it just jumps out and kind of slaps you in the face as an important truth. And so there were some things that were others, and I'm going to really quickly share a few things. One of those was parents. One of our first questions in the interviews, whether we were talking to the freshmen, the seniors, or the newly hired grads, is what helped you to get here? What helped you to get to this point? And they often talked about parents. And so we added a section. We weren't anticipating writing about the role of parents, but we did. And we kind of added that at the end of the book. A couple other things. I mentioned collaboration already. Both John and I are English teachers, and we were interested in communication. I believe to my soul that if kids can communicate well, speaking, writing, if you write well, doors will open for you. If you don't write well, there's simply doors that will close. There are careers that won't be available, and there's so much in each class when it comes to, literacy, reading and writing in every single area. Even if it's an area you're good at, like science and history, there's still a lot of reading and a lot of writing. And so we asked about communication, how they learned their communication skills, and where they were well prepared in writing and communication and where they weren't. And so we got some, I think, really great data and good information on that. But one thing that surprised me is when students talked about communication leading them to success, leading them to overcoming obstacles, leading them to do well in their classes and in life. They talked about the ability to communicate and advocate, the ability to talk to other people, the ability to talk to their professors, to a counselor, if they thought, I think I'm going to have to drop out of college because I'm not getting enough hours at work, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to pay my bill, or I got a warning. I've got warning status. So they talked about having the courage and the skills to ask about that and to ask for help and to find resources to help them get through some of those challenges. And that was a surprise to me. And it was actually a really important part of our data, I think, for kids to be successful in school and in their jobs, is to be able to reflect on where they need support and to be able to advocate for that and to communicate it well. The other area that I wasn't expecting students to talk about with such clarity and so often was the role that feedback played in their learning. And so I'm really looking forward to you reading that section on feedback, what students had to say about the type of feedback that they got and about the candor that sometimes came with that. I think that one thing that will always stick with me is how many students would share something that a teacher did, that a teacher said, some honest feedback that they gave them, not giving up on them. They would often say, I really didn't appreciate it at the time. In fact, it was really hard for them when they were being challenged or they were being given some really honest feedback. We had a young lady say to us, Mr. Grabowski just said, you cannot scowl every time I tell you a way to improve your writing and something that you could be doing differently or that you should be thinking about. She said, I didn't even know I was scowling. But she said it was hard to hear that because I always had just good feedback. And so, but she said it was that honest, challenging feedback that helped me to grow. And even when teachers were calling students on their behavior or on their irresponsibility in getting assignments in, they didn't particularly like that at the time. But as some time has passed and they've moved on and been able to be successful, they've realized how that accountability really was vital to them, and they have such deep appreciation for it now. So if you're ever feeling like you're not being appreciated at the time, do know that they not only appreciate it, but it's a lasting appreciation that they truly attribute to their success. The last thing I'm going to close with is to just share, because I think all of the people who signed up for the class are K-12 teachers. And although we really did want to look at what college professors were doing to help inform the teaching of college professors, and we did get some really good feedback from students, the one thing that surprised us over and over again, we'd laugh about it constantly, is when we'd ask them, like, tell us about what your teachers are doing to help you learn this skill or to help you overcome that. When we were talking to the college seniors or when we were talking to the newly hired grads, they would invariably go back to like their second grade teacher or their fifth grade teacher or their, ninth grade science teacher who really got them curious about something and passionate, and how they always remember how valued they felt by that teacher. They talked about just not even believing in themselves, in their skills and their knowledge, and teachers who were sort of relentless. Like the teachers, not only did they not give up on them, students would say they really believed in them when maybe I didn't deserve that respect or that attention to get me back on track, or when I didn't even believe in myself, they believed in me. And so although we've got good information on professors, you need to know that we listened to 23-year-old 24-year-old graduates in their first job talk about their elementary teachers, their middle school teachers, their high school teachers, and what an impact they had on them. So just know, not only is the impact great, it's truly long lasting. And it's something that I think we have to remember, because teaching is hard, and we have to remember why we're in it. And it really is to make a difference in the lives of kids and to empower them to do amazing things that they wouldn't have been able to do without that relationship, without that impact. It was fun to hear. So thanks for all you do as educators, and I hope you enjoy the book. Reach out anytime. And Happy New Year.